Hey, auto rifles in PvE just got buffed recently, and I wanted to test just how swole they really got. Like, are we talking Incrediboy or Mr. Incredible? Keanu Reeves or Keanu Leaves? Go Gadget or Go Get My Hatchet? Chris Pratt or Chris Pratt? And will that buff make any of these dusty old geezers viable again? Well, to find out, let's dive right in. Today, we're going to be putting these auto rifles through the testing ringer. Now, if you saw my pre-buff auto rifle testing video, you may have seen some, let's say, critical comments. I'll save you the sob story. It equates to test bad. Well, this time, I came prepared. So buckle in and get ready for some math! And don't get it twisted, this ain't just a test. Today, these guns are competing against one another. So before we get to the smackdown, let's get a breakdown of the math behind this competition. Now, this competition is going to surround each weapon's optimal DPS. But what is optimal DPS? For me and my test, optimal DPS is attempting to paint each weapon in the best light possible. To demonstrate that without making your brain hurt, the formula goes like this. Find the damage per second of a critical hit, find the damage per second of a body shot, and combine both numbers in an 80-20 split. Imagining that most players will hit their crits about 80% of the time, while hitting body shots 20% of the time. Of course, all of these numbers coming from using these weapons at their optimal ranges. Because this test surrounds the buff to red and orange bar enemies, each weapon will have at least two optimal DPS numbers, one for red and one for orange. And to top it off, each final DPS number is given a percentage decrease to account for reload speed, which has its own formula. As a given, any weapons with alternate firing modes, rate of fire increases, reload speed buffs, or possible damage buffs have been taken into account and are a part of the optimal DPS formulas for those specific weapons. And if you'd like to check my work and take a look under the hood of all that pesky math, I show my work in a Google Doc that will be linked in the description. Now, with all that nerdy math out of the way, let's get to the fun part. How we will be judging each weapon. Now, we could certainly make this boring and quick, take the highest number, shake their hand, and go home, but that's not fun. Instead, we will be judging these auto rifles in true Mario Party fashion with stars. After we break down each weapon's performance, we will award a number of various stars ranging in category, with the obvious ones being things like highest DPS and fastest reload speed, along with some more subjective ones, like most versatile and most subclass synergy. And you can bet there's going to be a few wacky ones in there too. But they're a surprise, so no picking. And after it's all said and done, the weapon with the most stars wins. And finally, with all that out of the way, let's get right into those numbers. The first gun on the roster has sugar and spice but won't treat you nice. It's Sweet Business. Sweet Business has a 360 RPM as well as a 150 round mag. Its exotic perk is Business Time, which changes its RPM from 360 to 900 after the first 10% of the mag is considered sustained fire. As for all guns in this competition, it will be as if the finger is never taken off the trigger. And yes, I do see its intrinsic trait, Payday, which allows for special and heavy ammo to completely reload the weapon. But considering the amount of variables needed to account for random ammo pickups, our testing can't fairly take this into account. So let's get into those spicy numbers. For red bar crits, the damage per second came to 48,772, while red bar body shots came to 34,799. For orange bar crits, the damage per second came to 34,842, while orange bar body shots came to 24,859. With the 80-20 split and reload speed taken into account, that brings our optimal DPS for Sweet Business to 36,093 for red bars and 25,784 for orange bars. Next up comes a weapon with a superiority complex worse than your ex. It's Suros Regime. Suros Regime starts off with a 600 RPM as well as a 36 round mag. Its intrinsic trait, Suros Legacy, gives a damage boost starting at the bottom half of the mag, and that damage continuously scales from 5% to 10% until the last bullet. This gives the bottom half of the mag a total 110% damage increase, which we painstakingly calculated. Suros Regime has two firing modes that are selectable within the weapon menu: Spinning Up and Dual Speed Receiver, both of which will receive their own DPS numbers. So let's start with Spinning Up. The Spinning Up perk gives us an increased rate of fire while holding down the trigger. And after some research and personal testing, this increase occurs after every third of the mag, with the top third firing at 600 RPM, the middle third firing at 720 RPM, and the bottom third firing at 900 RPM. With that out of the way, here's the numbers. The damage per second for red bar crits ended up being 51,007, and the damage per second for red bar body shots ended up being 33,827. The damage per second for orange bar crits ended up being 36,443, while the DPS for orange body shots equaled 24,162. And of course, with the 80-20 split and reload speed taken into account, that brings our optimal DPS for the Spinning Up firing mode of Suros Regime to 31,492 for red bar enemies and 22,499 for orange bar enemies. Next, let's move on to Suros Regime's second firing mode, Dual Speed Receiver. The exotic perk Dual Speed Receiver, instead of an increased rate of fire, gives us a flat damage boost of around 59% while aiming down sights, and decreases our RPM to 360. For numbers, the DPS for red bar crits was 46,574, while the DPS for red bar body shots was 29,146. The DPS for orange bar crits was 33,266, while the DPS for orange bar body shots was 20,823. With the 80-20 split and reload speed taken into account, that brings our optimal DPS for the Dual Speed Receiver firing mode of Suros Regime to 31,584 for red bars and 22,560 for orange bars. Next up is the Regent of Revenge himself, the Count of Monte Cristo. Carlo. The Monte Carlo. Monte Carlo is another 600 RPM auto rifle and comes with a 43 round mag. Its exotic perk, Markov Chain, gives us a stacking 13% damage buff each time we get a kill with this weapon. This can stack up to 5 times, last for 4.5 seconds, and that timer can be refreshed with each subsequent kill. That gives us a 65% damage buff at full stacks, which anyone can achieve very quickly given that any melee kill that you get grants you full stacks instead of just one. Because of this ease of use, our DPS numbers for Monte Carlo will assume that the weapon has max stacks of Markov Chain at all times. So, the DPS for red bar crits ended up being 53,510, while the DPS for red bar body shots ended up being 33,490. And the DPS for orange bar crits was 38,230, while the orange bar body shot DPS was 23,920. With the 80-20 split and reload speed taken into account, that brings our optimal DPS for Monte Carlo to 33,169 for red bars and 23,697 for orange bars. Next up is the three-headed dog that can't count. That's right, it's Cerberus Plus One. Cerberus Plus One fires at a 360 RPM and has a 31 round mag. And with its exotic catalyst unlocked, it has two distinct firing modes, that can be changed by holding your reload button. Its first being its natural firing mode, that doesn't have a name, so we're going to call it its boring mode, and its second being its focused fire mode, both of which will get their own DPS numbers. Let's start with boring mode. Boring mode is Cerberus Plus 1's normal firing mode. Again, it has a 360 RPM, and its effective range could be described as mid to long range. Firing anywhere closer than that will actually decrease your damage output. For numbers, the DPS for red bar crits ended up being 25,542, while the DPS for red bar body shots was 15,960. Meanwhile, the DPS for orange bar crits was 18,216, and the DPS for orange bar body shots was 10,872. Again, with the 80-20 split and reload speed taken into account, that brings our optimal DPS for boring mode Cerberus Plus 1 to 14,176 for red bars and 10,048 for orange bars. But what about focused fire mode? Focused fire mode is Cerberus Plus 1's close range mode, as some would call it a pseudo shotgun of an auto rifle. It fires at a 180 RPM, and the effective range starts to fall off almost immediately after leaving melee range, as you'll see in the test footage. But the DPS for red bar crits ended up being 73,914, while the DPS for red bar body shots ended up being 15,324. And the DPS for orange bar crits was 52,797, while the DPS for orange bar body shots was 10,947. With the 80-20 split and reload speed taken into account, that brings our optimal DPS for focused fire mode Cerberus Plus 1 to 51,001 for red bars and 36,430 for orange bars. Next up is hard.
Who else but Quagmire?
He's Quagmire, Quagmire. You never really know what he's gonna do next. He's Quagmire, Quagmire.
Giggity, 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 let's have sex.
Sorry. Hard light. Hard light has a 600 RPM and a 49 round mag. Its exotic perk, the Fundamentals, allows you to switch damage types by holding the reload button. Each damage type also comes with a slight buff to various weapon stats. Void gives stability and aim assist, Arc gives increased handling and range, and Solar gives increased reload speed and aerial effectiveness. In order to put Hard Light in its most optimal condition, we will be using the Solar reload speed buff throughout our testing. Hard Light also has an intrinsic trait, Volatile Light, which adds intrinsic ricochet rounds, and a 100% damage buff to all bullets after they bounce. So for our testing, we will consider damage as if all bullets have bounced. That being said, as you can see from our testing footage, utilizing ricochet rounds makes hitting crits much less reliable. So we are making the only exception in our test for the 80-20 split and swapping it to a 20-80 crit to body split. I believe this more accurately portrays how the weapon would play even in most optimal conditions. But with all that being said, here are the numbers. The DPS for red bar crits ended up being 58,960, while the DPS for red bar body shots was 36,900. The DPS for orange bar crits was 42,120, while the DPS for orange bar body shots was 26,360. With the new 20-80 split and the reload speed buff from Solar taken into account, that brings our optimal DPS for Hard Light to 29,332 for red bars and 20,954 for orange bars. Now for the first of our last two weapons, everyone's favorite 1920s episodic thriller, Tommy's Matchbook. Tommy's Matchbook fires at a 720 RPM and has a 100 round mag. Its intrinsic trait, Ignition Trigger, gives around a 99% damage boost after 20 bullets of sustained fire. This sustained fire self-inflicts the wielder until their shield is broken. Of course, we calculated the damage from the top 20 bullets of each mag, as well as the remaining 80 of each mag, and combined them together for each total DPS number. So let's dive into those numbers. The DPS for red bar crits was 55,846, while the DPS for red bar body shots was 37,231. The DPS for orange bar crits was 39,890, while the DPS for orange bar body shots was 26,594. With the regular 80-20 split and reload speed taken into account, that brings our optimal DPS for Tommy's Matchbook to 38,206 for red bars and 27,290 for orange bars. And finally, the last weapon on our roster, the Quicksilver that took us by storm, Quicksilver Storm.
You didn't see that coming.
Quicksilver Storm also has a 720 RPM and has a 51 round mag. Its intrinsic trait, Rocket Tracers, turns your next shot into a nanorocket after landing multiple shots. Our testing estimated that for every 10 bullets fired, 1 nanorocket was created. This ratio will be used and combined into the overall DPS numbers for each enemy type. Quicksilver Storm also has its exotic perk, Grenade Chaser, which allows the user to switch to a grenade launcher mode by holding their reload button. The number of grenades available depends on the number of nanorockets landed beforehand. Our testing estimated that for every 2 nanorockets hit, 1 grenade was available for use. This ratio will also be used for DPS calculations, but will actually be separate from the optimal DPS numbers for Quicksilver Storm. Switching between the 2 firing modes and reloading each sequential shot has too many variables and differs based on the user, so we're keeping the DPS for Grenade Chaser as a separate number. That being said, the DPS for red bar crits equaled 31,248, while the DPS for red bar body shots was 20,832. On top of that, the damage for each nanorocket to red bars was 12,432. For orange bars, the DPS for orange bar crits was 22,320, while the DPS for orange bar body shots was 14,880, and the damage that nanorockets did to orange bars was 8,880. For Grenade Chaser, the damage to red bars was 136,748, as well as 1,924 per direct hit. And for orange bars, the damage was 97,677, as well as 1,374 per direct hit. With the 80-20 split, nanorockets, and reload speed taken into account, that brings our optimal DPS for Quicksilver Storm to 24,126 for red bars, 17,233 for orange bars, and for our grenade launcher, 97,070 for red bars, and 69,336 for orange bars. Woo! That was a lot of numbers. Take a second to rest your beautiful little brains. Just kidding, it's time for stars, baby! The wonderful categories we have today are highest DPS, fastest reload speed, most versatile, most subclass synergy, best alternate firing mode, most shocking, easiest to use, and 1 secret star for the end. So, Sweat, why don't you say we start handing out those stars?
Yes, bitch! Yes! Oh, yes!
The star for highest DPS at 51,001 goes to Cerberus +1 Focused Fire mode. Focused Fire won by a landslide, with over a 12,000 damage per second difference between first and second place. The fastest reload speed star is awarded to none other than Hardlight, with its main contributor for success being its solar mode, making its reload speed a lightning fast 1.55. For the most versatile star, the award goes to Quicksilver Storm, with the nanorockets that don't fall off due to range, the alternate grenade launcher mode, the ability to inherently create tangles with the catalyst, and currently in Season 20 to have 5 seasonal artifacts, making this weapon even better. Quicksilver Storm easily takes this star. For most subclass synergy, This star goes to none other than Monte Carlo. A close second would be Quicksilver Storm with its ability to create tangles, but with Monte Carlo's ability to regen your melee and sometimes completely refresh it, and then getting in a melee kill, making the gun that much more powerful, makes any melee-centered build on any class that much stronger. But now here comes the star for Best Alternate Firing Mode. There were many alternate firing modes in this lineup, with guns like Suros Regime, Cerberus +1, Quicksilver Storm, and technically Hardlight. But the one who takes this star home has gotta be Quicksilver Storm, with notably a close second being Cerberus's Focused Fire mode. Quicksilver Storm's Grenade Chaser mode is just too powerful to ignore. In fact, I'd say that you just aren't using the gun properly if you do not use your grenade launcher as much as possible. We're talking close to hundreds of thousands of damage that you're missing out on. That makes this alternate firing mode indispensable, and the one that deserves this star the most. With 3 more stars to go, here comes the star for Most Shocking. And of course, this star goes to Suros Regime. And to be honest, it's not for great reasons. Upon initial testing, it looked as if this spinning up perk would actually do more damage than the dual speed receiver perk, which would be really shocking. But once reload speed was taken into account, they're literally the same. They do almost the same damage. And this is across both red and orange bar enemies. So, I don't know, man, just pick whatever perk you think feels better. I'm sure in PvP, the case is vastly different, but for PvE, I would go with dual speed receiver just because the rate of fire doesn't change. But yeah, shocking and disappointing. That brings us to our second to last star of the video, easiest to use. For me, there was ever only one option for this star, and that would be my boy Monte Carlo again. It's just as if you have a God Roll legendary auto rifle with a damage perk, but it works with your subclass too. There's no alternate firing modes, no finicky mechanics to work around. It just works, and it works for you. Makes the game fun and a little bit more viable, considering you don't have better options. And that brings us to our final star of the video, Totally Rigged. Now, I said a couple times just how long it took me to get this math up and going, and that can be reflected on how long it took me to post this. But one aspect of that was the fact that I had my DPS numbers, but forgot to take into account reload speed. I, of course, rectified that situation, but I have both numbers now. One considering reload speed, and one not. And the Totally Rigged star goes to the weapon that reload speed affected the most. And to be honest, I did not expect this weapon to win this star. But the winner of the Totally Rigged star is Quicksilver Storm. Trust me, I did the math. In fact, here's a graph to show just how these numbers ended up. There were a lot of weapons I would think would have the most difference between without reload speed and with reload speed. From the top of my head, I would have thought Sweet Business would be a contender. But when it came down to it, Quicksilver Storm actually lost 72% of its damage when reload speed was taken into account. The only other weapon that came close to that was actually Cerberus +1's Boring mode at 66%. And finally, with all the stars awarded, at first place, we have Quicksilver Storm. To be honest, if you clicked on this video, you probably thought this was going to be the winner, and in the back of my head, I probably thought the same thing. But to be honest, there's a lot of exotic auto rifles on this list that deserve your attention. I, for one, am definitely going to be making a build with Monte Carlo. Tommy's Matchbook seems super interesting to me, and God forbid I want to make Cerberus +1 useful in some way. But hey, put your pencils down, test is over. Let me know in the comments which gun you thought was going to win, and how you feel about Quicksilver Storm winning it out. And also, if you liked this kind of video, where it's a deep dive into damage testing and a little bit of fun mixed in, You can let me know in the comments below, or simply give this video a like and subscribe for more. I'd love to do more, but they take a lot from me. As always, like and sub if you want to see more, and stay safe out there, Guardians. I'll see you next time.